In this video, I'll provide an introduction to intentional torts and also the concept of tortious intent. As an overview, I'll begin by looking at the various theories of intentional tort, and we'll break these into two categories. We'll then look at the privileges that can be used by defendants against these theories of intentional tort, and we'll also split those privileges into two categories. From there, we'll look at the general elements that apply to most intentional tort theories, though we will see some variation from tort to tort as we move forward. We'll wrap up by at least introducing the common element of intent, and I'll highlight four of the issues that can arise in this topic. Now, intentional torts can be either conduct that causes harm to persons or conduct that harms property. So the conduct that harms persons can include a number of torts. One is the tort of assault, which is actions that place another person in apprehension of a battery. Battery, which is a harmful or offensive contact. False imprisonment, which is confining or restraining somebody against their will. And then intentional infliction of emotional distress, which is extreme and outrageous conduct that causes serious emotional distress. The other category of harms against property includes violations of real estate and personal property. Trespass to land is directed against the violations of real estate, and the personal property torts are trespass to chattels and conversion. These two torts are very similar. They're just kind of variations of degree. Trespass to chattels typically handles less serious intrusions upon personal property, and conversion is used for more serious intrusions upon personal property. Now, for the privileges, here again we see that there is a couple of different type of arguments that can be made. One type of argument is based on consent. This is where the plaintiff actually gives permission to the defendant to engage in the conduct that ultimately causes the plaintiff's injury. But the other category of privileges is based on the concept of reasonableness. Here the plaintiff doesn't give consent necessarily, but society provides kind of implicit permission for someone to engage in harmful conduct towards somebody else in order to promote some superior goal or end. Now, there's a number of these reasonableness-based privileges, but as I noted, they're all based on the concept that it would be reasonable for somebody to engage in the conduct that ultimately caused the plaintiff's harm. The first two are privileges that you would use against the torts of harms against persons. So self-defense is a means of defending yourself against an assault or a battery or false imprisonment. Defense of others, same thing, but only now you're using it to defend somebody else. The remaining two reasonableness privileges are usually used in the property tort. So defense of property or recovery of property you would use against trespass to land or trespass to chattels or conversion. Necessity is also usually used in property cases, though we'll see that sometimes it has a catch-all quality and could be used even in harms against persons. Now, the elements for intentional torts include four concepts. You've already seen in one of your videos that there must be a volitional act, and because that's well explained in the video, I won't go into any more detail here. That act must be committed with intent, and in a moment we'll talk a little bit more about that. The act must also cause a forbidden harm. A little bit later we'll discuss what are the tests for determining causation, and then when we start specifically analyzing individual intentional torts, we'll look at the types of forbidden harm that are unique to each. We just talked about assault and battery and so forth. For battery, we know there must be a harmful or offensive contact, so that fills in this missing language of what is the forbidden harm. So we're going to round out this introduction by at least giving you a roadmap of the topics that we'll look at for the concept or the element of intent. We'll first look at the test for intent, and we'll use the Garrett versus Daly case in order to see what they are and how they apply. We'll then look at the question as to whether or not courts will use a concept of either single intent or dual intent, and we'll use the White versus Muniz case both to get a sense as to what those concepts mean and what the policy implications are for choosing one over the other. We'll then take a look at the concept of transferred intent, and we'll use the Hall versus McBride case in order to get a better handle on that. Once again, that's a concept that is reviewed fairly well in the video, so we'll spend most of our time really looking at the Hall case in particular. And we'll wrap up by looking at how the intent requirement applies to people that perhaps may pose a problem in the application of the element. This includes children and adults with mental disabilities. We'll study this using the Waters versus Blackshear case.